Most destructive technology. Another day, another story. In his 1798 an essay on the principle of population, Thomas Malthus predicted that the world's population growth would outpace food production, leading to global famine and mass starvation. That hasn't happened yet. But a report from the World Resources Institute last year predicts that food producers will need to supply 56% more calories by 2050 to meet the demands of a growing population. It turns out some of the same farming techniques that staved off a Malthusian catastrophe also led to soil erosion and contributed to climate change. Feeding the world without deepening the climate crisis will require new technological breakthroughs. This situation illustrates the push and pull effect of new technologies. But before we begin, please like and subscribe to our YouTube channel for such amazing and informative videos. Humanity solves one problem, but the unintended side effects of the solution create new ones. Thus far civilization has stayed one step ahead of its problems. But philosopher Nick Bostrom worries we might not always be so lucky. But since founding the Future of Humanity Institute at the University of Oxford in 2005, Bostrom has been focused on a decidedly more grim field of speculation: existential risks to humanity. In his 2014 book Superintelligence, Bostrom sounded an alarm about the risks of artificial intelligence. His latest paper, The Vulnerable World Hypothesis, widens the lens to look at other ways technology could ultimately devastate civilization, and how humanity might try to avoid that fate. But his vision of a totalitarian future shows why the cure might be worse than the cause. What is the vulnerable world hypothesis? Nick Bostrom. It's the idea that we could picture the history of human creativity as the process of extracting balls from a giant urn. These balls represent different ideas, technologies, and methods that we have discovered throughout history. By now we have extracted a great many of these, and for the most part they have been beneficial. They are white balls. Some have been mixed blessings, gray balls of various shades. But what we haven't seen is a black ball, some technology that by default devastates the civilization that discovers it. The vulnerable world hypothesis is that there is some black ball in the urn, that there is some level of technology at which civilization gets decimated by default. What might be an example of a black ball? It looks like we will one day democratize the ability to create weapons of mass destruction using synthetic biology. But there isn't nearly the same kind of security culture in biological sciences as there is nuclear physics and nuclear engineering. After Hiroshima, nuclear scientists realized that what they were doing wasn't all fun and games, and that they needed oversight and a broader sense of responsibility. Many of the physicists who were involved in the Manhattan Project became active in the nuclear disarmament movement and so forth. There isn't something similar in the bioscience communities. So that's one area where we could see possible black balls emerging. People have been worried that a suicidal lone wolf might kill the world with a superbug, at least since Alice Bradley Sheldon's sci-fi story, The Last Flight of Dr. Ain, which was published in 1969. What's new in your paper? To some extent, the hypothesis is kind of a crystallization of various big ideas that are floating around. I wanted to draw attention to different types of vulnerability. One possibility is that it gets too easy to destroy things, and the world gets destroyed by some evil doer. I call this easy nukes. But there are also these other slightly more subtle ways that technology could change the incentives that bad actors face. For example, the safe first strike scenario, where it becomes in the interest of some powerful actor like a state to do things that are destructive because they risk being destroyed by a more aggressive actor if they don't. Cows and fossil fuels look like gray balls so far, but that could change. I think what this paper adds is a more systematic way to think about these risks. A categorization of the different approaches to managing these risks and their pros and cons, and the metaphor itself makes it easier to call attention to possibilities that are hard to see. But technological development isn't as random as pulling balls out of an urn, is it? Governments, universities, corporations, and other institutions decide what research to fund, and the research builds on previous research. It's not as if research just produces random results in random order. What's often hard to predict is, supposing you find the result you're looking for, what result comes from using that as a stepping stone? What other discoveries might follow from this, and what uses might someone put this new information or technology to? What result comes from using that as a stepping stone? What other discoveries might follow from this, and what uses might someone put this new information or technology to? In the paper I have this historical example of when nuclear physicists realized you could split the atom. Leo Szilard realized you could make a chain reaction and make a nuclear bomb. Now we know to make a nuclear explosion requires these difficult and rare materials. We were lucky in that sense. And though we did avoid nuclear Armageddon, it looks like a fair amount of luck was involved in that. If you look at the archives from the Cold War, it looks like there were many occasions when we drove all the way to the brink. If we'd been slightly less lucky, or if we continue in the future to have other Cold Wars or nuclear arms races, we might find that nuclear technology was a black ball. If you want to refine the metaphor and make it more realistic, you could stipulate that it's a tubular urn, so you've got to pull out the balls towards the top of the urn before you can reach the balls further into the urn. You might say that some balls have strings between them, so if you get one you get another automatically. You could add various details that would complicate the metaphor but would also incorporate more aspects of our real technological situation. But I think the basic point is best made by the original, perhaps oversimplified metaphor of the urn. So is it inevitable that as technology advances, as we continue pulling balls from the urn so to speak, that we'll eventually draw a black one? Is there anything we can do about that? I don't think it's inevitable. For one, we don't know if the urn contains any black balls. If we are lucky, it doesn't. If you want to have a general ability to stabilize civilization in the event that we should pull out the black ball, logically speaking, there are 4 possible things you could do. One would be to stop pulling balls out of the urn. As a general solution, that's clearly no good. We can't stop technological development, and even if we did, that could be the greatest catastrophe at all. We can choose to de-emphasize work on developing more powerful biological weapons. I think that's clearly a good idea, but that won't create a general solution. The second option would be to make sure there is nobody who would use technology to do catastrophic evil even if they had access to it. That also looks like a limited solution because realistically you couldn't get rid of every person who would use a destructive technology. So that leaves 2 other options. One is to develop the capacity for extremely effective preventive policing, to surveil populations in real time, so if someone began using a black ball technology they could be intercepted and stopped. That has many risks and problems as well if you're talking about an intrusive surveillance scheme, but we can discuss that further. Just to put everything on the map, the 4th possibility would be effective ways of solving global coordination problems. Some sort of global governance capability that would prevent great power wars, arms races, and destruction of the global commons. That sounds dystopian. And wouldn't that sort of one-world government, surveillance state be the exact sort of thing that would motivate someone to try to destroy the world? It's not like I'm gung-ho about living under surveillance, or that I'm blind about the ways that could be misused. In the discussion about the preventive policing, I have a little vignette where everyone has a kind of necklace with cameras. I called it a freedom tag. It sounds Orwellian on purpose. I wanted to make sure that everybody would be vividly aware of the obvious potential for misuse. I'm not sure every reader got the sense of irony. The vulnerable world hypothesis should be just one consideration among many other considerations. We might not think the possibility of drawing a black ball outweighs the risks involved in building a surveillance state. The paper is not an attempt to make an all things considered assessment about these policy issues. What if instead of focusing on general solutions that attempt to deal with any potential black ball, we instead tried to deal with black balls on a case-by-case basis? So, if you're interested in learning more amazing facts, make sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel and hit the bell icon to get notified by our new videos. Please like and share the video. Don't forget to comment down your views on this. Thanks for watching till the end.